A single train ride, 2 abandoned buildings, $7,500. That's all it took to change the destiny of American industry forever. But what happened inside those walls would create weapons that won World War II, invent television broadcasting itself, power the entire planet, employ 45,000 people in a single location, and then collapse in the most brutal corporate massacre in American history. This is the story of how Thomas Edison's greatest creation wasn't the light bulb. It was a factory that would light the world, pioneer the future, and then watch everything burn to ashes. Subscribe now for more incredible factory stories that changed everything. Before we dive deep into this tragedy, you need to understand something crucial. What you're about to hear isn't just another corporate history. This is the story of how an entire American city rose and fell based on the decisions of a handful of men. How pure innovation built an empire that changed civilization. How unbridled greed systematically destroyed it. And how the workers caught in the middle, the people who actually built America's future with their own hands, paid the ultimate price for decisions they never made. This factory didn't just make products, it made the modern world. And what happened to it is happening right now, all across America. Pay attention, because this story is your warning. August 20th, 1886. Thomas Edison steps off a train in Schenectady, New York. He's not here by choice. He's not here because he loves the city. He's not even here because he wants to be. He's here because his back is against the wall, and he's drowning in Manhattan. His Edison Machine Works, the factory that's supposed to be churning out the dynamos that will electrify America, is literally falling apart at the seams. Workers are on strike. The machines are spilling out onto the sidewalks because there's no room inside the cramped Manhattan building. Drive belts snake through windows, powering lathes that sit on the street like some kind of industrial carnival. This is Edison's empire, and it's a complete disaster. But Edison has a problem way bigger than just space. He's hemorrhaging money in New York City at a rate that will bankrupt him within months. Labor costs are astronomical. Real estate prices make expansion impossible. Rent alone is killing his margins. And every single day he stays in Manhattan, he loses more ground to his competitors who are setting up shop in cheaper locations. The electrical industry in 1886 isn't just competitive, it's a full-scale war. Everyone wants to control electricity, the technology that will define the next century. And Thomas Edison, the famous inventor, the wizard of Menlo Park, the man who supposedly can't fail, is losing badly. So he makes a desperate decision. He sends scouts across New York State with a simple mission. Find me land, find me cheap labor, find me anywhere but this expensive hellhole. And one of those scouts, a man named Harry Leevor, boards a train heading to Amsterdam, New York. He's not expecting to find anything in tiny Schenectady. The city has maybe 13,000 people. It's basically farmland with a downtown. But as his train rolls through, Leevor looks out the window and sees something that stops his heart. 2 enormous factory buildings, brand new, empty, abandoned. Just sitting there between the Erie Canal and the New York Central Railroad line, like gifts from God. These buildings are perfect, more than perfect. They have loading docks on the canal, they have railroad access, they're massive with high ceilings, perfect for manufacturing heavy machinery, and they're empty because they were supposed to be the McQueen Locomotive Works. Walter McQueen, a former employee of a local locomotive company, had a falling out with his boss, decided to start his own competing business, had his financial backer, Charles Stanford, build these 2 beautiful factory buildings, and then Stanford died suddenly, leaving the buildings 95% complete but totally abandoned. Nobody wants them, nobody can afford them, they're just sitting there, rotting. Leevor gets off at the next stop and rushes back to Schenectady. He finds the executors of Stanford's estate, makes inquiries, gets a price, $37,500 for both buildings. He telegraphs Edison immediately, "This is it, this is the answer. The buildings are perfect, the location is ideal, the price is reasonable." Edison comes to see for himself on August 20th. He walks through the empty buildings, examines the structure, checks the rail access, studies the canal docks, does the math in his head, and he makes an offer. $37,500. The executors counter, $45,000. Edison refuses, won't budge, $37,500, final offer. And this is where the entire future of General Electric, one of the most important companies in American history, almost dies over $7,500.
Think about the absurdity of this moment. A company that will eventually be worth $410 billion.
That will employ hundreds of thousands of people, that will power civilization itself, that will win world wars and invent the future. All of it almost ends right here, because Thomas Edison, stubborn as always, refuses to pay $7,500 more than he thinks the buildings are worth. That's roughly $200,000 in today's money. A rounding error, pocket change for what's at stake. But Edison won't pay it, and the executors won't come down. Stalemate. Enter Colonel Robert Furman and a group of Schenectady businessmen who understand exactly what's at stake. If Edison comes to their town, everything changes. Schenectady in 1886 is a sleepy canal town. Some farming, some small manufacturing, nothing special. These businessmen know that bringing Edison here will transform their city into an industrial powerhouse, so they make a decision that will echo through history. They pool together $7,500 of their own money, hand it to Edison. Done. The buildings are his. Think about that act for a moment. These local businessmen just bought the future of their city, and they were right to do it, because what happens next will turn Schenectady into the city that lights and hauls the world, one of the most important industrial centers on the planet. October 1886. The Edison Machine Works officially opens in Schenectady. Edison brings 200 workers from Manhattan, the best machinists, the most skilled electricians, the people who know how to build dynamos better than anyone else on Earth. Within 2 months, that number hits 300. Within a year, over 500. By 1889, more than 1,500 people work at the Schenectady factory. The growth is explosive.
They can't build new factory buildings fast enough to keep up with demand. But here's what makes this moment truly revolutionary. Edison isn't just moving a factory, he's moving a vision of the future. Because in 1886, electricity is actual magic to most Americans. Cities are lit by gas lamps that hiss and smoke. Homes have candles and kerosene lamps that are constant fire hazards. The idea that you could flip a switch on a wall and instantly flood a room with clean, safe, bright light seems like science fiction, like something from a Jules Verne novel. Impossible. But Edison has already proven it works. His Pearl Street station in New York City has been running since 1882, the first central power station in America, the first place where electricity was generated in one location and distributed to multiple buildings through underground cables. It's a miracle. And now he needs to scale that miracle. He needs to build the machines that will electrify America, then the world. And Schenectady is where he'll do it. The workers who come to Schenectady aren't just assembling widgets, they're building dynamos, these massive electrical generators that can power entire city blocks. Each dynamo is custom built, hand-fitted by master craftsmen. The rotors alone weigh thousands of pounds. The copper windings must be wound by hand with perfect precision. One mistake and the whole machine fails. This is engineering as art, manufacturing as craftsmanship, and they're shipping these masterpieces across America faster than anyone imagined possible. To Chicago, where they'll light the World's Fair, to Boston, where they'll replace the gas lamps with electric streetlights, to Philadelphia, to San Francisco, to small towns across the country.
Everywhere electricity is spreading like a revolution, there's a dynamo from Schenectady powering it. The factory becomes the beating heart of the electrical age. But Edison has bigger plans, way bigger. In 1889, he orchestrates a massive consolidation. He merges the Edison Machine Works with 3 other companies he controls: the Edison Electric Light Company, which holds his lighting patents, Bergman and Company, which manufactures electrical fixtures, the Edison Lamp Company, which produces light bulbs. Together, they become Edison General Electric. Headquarters? Schenectady. Manufacturing center? Schenectady. The future of electricity? Built in Schenectady. And for a brief, shining moment, Thomas Edison stands at the absolute pinnacle of the industrial world. He's not just an inventor anymore. He's running a massive manufacturing empire. He controls the key patents that every competitor needs. He has the best engineers, the most skilled workers, the most advanced facilities. He is electricity, and electricity is the future. But that moment of triumph doesn't last, because in 1892, something happens that Edison will never, ever forgive, will never get over, will carry with him as a bitter wound until his death. The board of directors, the money men who actually control Edison General Electric, force a merger with Edison's biggest competitor, the Thomson-Houston Electric Company, run by 2 brilliant inventors, Elihu Thomson and Charles Brush, who have their own electrical patents and their own vision for the industry.
The board tells Edison this merger is necessary, that combining the companies will create an unstoppable force, that the patent wars between the two firms are wasting money and holding back progress.
That together they'll dominate the electrical industry completely. Edison fights it, argues against it, threatens to walk away, but the board doesn't care what Edison wants. They want the merger. They get the merger. The new company is called General Electric. Notice something missing from that name? Edison's name, the company he built, the vision he created, the factories he established, and they remove his name from it. They push him aside, diminish his influence, make it clear that he's just one voice among many now. Thomas Edison, the most famous inventor in America, maybe in the world, is shown the door by his own company. The betrayal is complete. This wound will fester for the rest of Edison's life. He'll eventually sell most of his GE stock, distance himself from the company, focus on other ventures, but he'll never forget, never forgive. The company that became General Electric essentially told its founder he wasn't needed anymore. Think about that. The man who created the entire electrical industry was pushed out of the company he built because the money men wanted more control. But here's the ironic twist. The merger that Edison hated actually creates something unprecedented in industrial history. Because General Electric in 1892 isn't just big, it's a monopoly. They control almost every major patent in electrical engineering. Edison's incandescent lamp patents, Thomson's arc lighting systems, Brush's high-tension electrical distribution methods, every critical technology for generating, distributing, and using electricity, all under one roof, all being manufactured in Schenectady. And this consolidation, this gathering of all the electrical genius in one company, creates an explosion of innovation that changes everything. Because before 1892, Edison and Thomson Houston were enemies, fighting patent battles in court, wasting resources trying to destroy each other, duplicating research efforts. But now they're on the same team. And when you put the greatest electrical engineers in the world in the same factory, working together instead of against each other, you don't just get better products, you get miracles. Enter Charles Proteus Steinmetz. If you've never heard this name, stop what you're doing and pay attention, because this man might be the single most important person in American industrial history that you've never learned about in school. And what makes his story even more remarkable is how unlikely it is. Steinmetz arrives in America in 1889, fleeing Germany. He's a socialist newspaper editor who the German government wants to arrest for his political writings. He's also 4 feet tall with a hunched back, the result of a congenital condition. He looks like someone society would pity, maybe even discard. He's actually a mathematical genius who's about to rewrite the laws of physics and transform General Electric from a manufacturing company into an innovation powerhouse. Steinmetz lands a job at a tiny electrical company in Yonkers, New York, Rudolf Eichemeyer's company, making electrical equipment. And immediately, Steinmetz starts solving problems that other engineers swear are impossible. The biggest problem in the electrical industry at this time is something called hysteresis. When you run alternating current through electrical equipment, you lose energy. Transformers heat up, motors become inefficient. Nobody understands why. Most engineers don't even believe the loss is real. They think it's just measurement error. Steinmetz proves them all wrong. He develops complex mathematical equations that explain hysteresis completely. He shows exactly how much energy is lost, why it's lost, and how to minimize the loss through better design. Other engineers look at his equations and their heads spin. The math is so advanced, so sophisticated, that it takes years for most people to even understand what he's done. But the results speak for themselves. Electrical equipment designed using Steinmetz's formulas is dramatically more efficient, more reliable, more powerful. This is 1892. Steinmetz is 27 years old, and General Electric hears about this weird little German man with the twisted spine who can do electrical calculations in his head that other engineers need days to work out with paper and pencil. They want him, they need him, but Steinmetz is loyal to Eichemeyer, refuses to leave his boss. So GE does what GE does when it wants something. They buy the entire Eichemeyer company, the whole firm, just to get Steinmetz. And they send him to Schenectady, where he'll transform not just GE, but the entire concept of industrial innovation. Because Steinmetz doesn't just solve technical problems, he revolutionizes how companies think about research. In 1899, he goes to the GE executives with a radical proposal: create a research laboratory.
Not a development lab where you improve existing products, a pure research lab where scientists can experiment with completely new ideas without worrying about immediate profits or commercial applications. A place where the only goal is to push the boundaries of human knowledge and see what happens. The executives think he's insane. Research costs money, lots of money. Scientists, equipment, laboratories?
Experiments that might lead nowhere. Where's the return on investment? How do you justify spending money on research that might never produce a sellable product? It's crazy. But Steinmetz makes an argument that will echo through the entire 20th century. He tells them that the future belongs to companies that invent it, that waiting for competitors to innovate and then copying them is a losing strategy, that GE needs to be discovering new technologies before their competitors even know they're possible, that pure research, even when it fails, teaches you things that give you advantages everywhere else, that if you want to dominate an industry, you don't just make better products than everyone else, you make products nobody else even imagined existed. The executives are skeptical, but Steinmetz is already the most valuable person at GE. His patents alone are worth millions. When he talks, people listen. So in 1900, they agree to a trial. The General Electric Research Laboratory opens in Steinmetz's carriage house behind his home in Schenectady. 3 months later, it burns down in a fire. They rebuild it on the main GE campus, and that laboratory becomes the engine that drives the 20th century forward. Think about what comes out of this lab over the next decades. William Coolidge develops ductile tungsten in 1910, making light bulbs last 10 times longer and cost a fraction of what they used to. This one invention secures GE's dominance in the lighting industry for generations. Irving Langmuir discovers atomic hydrogen, develops the gas-filled light bulb, creates plasma welding technology, and wins the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1932 for his work on surface chemistry.
The lab creates the modern X-ray tube that makes medical imaging possible, saving millions of lives. They develop the first practical vacuum tubes for radio, launching the entire broadcasting industry. They invent the electric refrigerator, transforming how people store food and revolutionizing public health. The first few hundred GE refrigerators ever sold, all in Schenectady, to GE workers as a test market. But wait, there's more, so much more. The lab invents jet engines that will power commercial aviation. In 1941, they build the IA, America's first jet engine, based on British designs. This technology will eventually lead to GE becoming one of the world's largest jet engine manufacturers. They create the laser in the early 1960s, with physicist Robert Hall developing the first semiconductor laser. They develop synthetic diamonds for industrial use, solving one of nature's hardest manufacturing challenges. They pioneer cloud seeding to make rain, with Vincent Schaefer and Irving Langmuir discovering that dropping dry ice into clouds creates precipitation. They build some of the first computers. They work on nuclear power, developing reactors for submarines and power plants. Everything that defines modern technological life, from the light bulbs in your ceiling to the jet engines on airplanes to the medical equipment that saves lives every single day, it all flows from this laboratory in Schenectady. And there's something else that comes from GE Schenectady that changes the world in ways nobody expected: broadcasting. Radio and television broadcasting. In 1922, GE launches radio station WGY in Schenectady, one of the first radio stations in America.
The call letters stand for Wireless, General Electric, and the last letter in Schenectady. From the very beginning, WGY is revolutionary. They broadcast the first radio drama in American history. The WGY Players, a theater troupe, perform 40-minute adaptations of stage plays. They invent sound effects for radio. The first time someone slapped two boards together to simulate a door slamming during a radio play, that was at WGY in Schenectady. They broadcast live from remote locations, connecting telephone lines to transmit football games, political speeches, concerts from hundreds of miles away. This is 1922. Most people have never heard a radio broadcast. WGY is inventing the entire medium. And then they do something even more revolutionary. They start experimenting with television. In January 1928, GE launches experimental television station W2XB in Schenectady, one of the first television stations in the entire world. They're broadcasting using mechanical television, a rotating disc with holes that creates a picture with 24 lines of resolution. It's primitive, the images are blurry, the quality is terrible, but it works. Moving pictures transmitted through the air. On September 11, 1928, W2XB broadcasts America's first television drama, a 40-minute one-act play called The Queen's Messenger. Because TV screens are so small and resolution is so poor, they only show the actors' faces or hands.
They use 3 cameras, 2 for faces and 1 for hands and props. The play has 2 characters, but requires 4 actors, 2 for faces and 2 for hands. Amateur radio operators in Los Angeles and Pittsfield, Massachusetts, watch the experimental broadcast on homemade television sets and report the results.
Voices very strong. Images only fair due to fading. But it works. Television works. Through the 1930s, GE keeps improving television technology, moving from mechanical systems to electronic systems, increasing resolution from 24 lines to 343 lines to 441 lines to 525 lines, the standard that will last for decades. And in 1942, W2XB becomes WRGB, named after Walter Ransom Gale Baker, a GE vice president and co-founder of the National Television System Committee. WRGB becomes the 4th commercial television station in America and the 2nd outside New York City. This is crucial. This matters more than you might think. Because GE didn't just invent the technology for television, they created the infrastructure, the standards, the broadcasting methods. When television explodes after World War II and becomes the dominant medium of American culture, it's built on foundations laid in Schenectady. Every television station in America owes something to the work done at WRGB. Every broadcaster learned techniques pioneered in Schenectady. In 1919, GE helps form the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, to develop radio technology and broadcasting. GE is a part owner of RCA and later helps create the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, the first radio network. Although the government forces GE to sell their stake in RCA in 1932 to break up the monopoly, GE's DNA is in the entire broadcasting industry. And in 1941, WRGB becomes the first television station to receive broadcasts from New York City, creating the first television network. Think about that. The first TV network originates from Schenectady.
The longest-running locally produced children's television show in American history, Freihofer's Bread Time Stories, broadcasts on WRGB starting in 1949. For decades, it's a staple of childhood in the Capital District. WRGB produces quiz shows, bowling programs, local news that set standards for the industry. In 1957, they move into purpose-built studios on Balltown Road, facilities designed specifically for television production. These studios still exist today, though GE sold the station in 1983. So when you think about GE Schenectady, don't just think about turbines and generators. Think about the fact that every time you turn on a television, you're using technology that was pioneered in this factory town in upstate New York. Radio drama? Schenectady. Sound effects? Schenectady. Television broadcasting? Schenectady. The modern world of media and entertainment owes an enormous debt to this place. And it's not just what they invent, it's how they work. Because Steinmetz refuses to run the lab like a traditional factory. He doesn't wear ties, doesn't keep office hours. He does his most important calculations while paddling a canoe on the Mohawk River, writing equations on a board stretched across the hull. He builds a cabin in the woods near Schenectady where he disappears for days to think without interruption. He's a socialist who hosts radical political discussions at his home. He adopts an entire family, his lab assistant Joseph Leroy Hayden's family, because he wants children around him but is afraid to have his own. He's afraid they'll inherit his physical disabilities, but he needs family, so he creates one. And Steinmetz creates something else too.
A culture of innovation at GE that's completely unlike anywhere else in American industry. Scientists and engineers work on whatever interests them. They're encouraged to fail, to experiment wildly, to collaborate across disciplines. This is revolutionary in 1900. Factories are supposed to be rigid, hierarchical. Workers do exactly what they're told, nothing more. But at the GE Research Lab, and increasingly on the factory floor itself, there's creative freedom. And that freedom breeds genius after genius after genius. The results are staggering beyond belief. By 1904, the Schenectady Works covers hundreds of acres. There are dozens of buildings, each one massive. They're manufacturing steam turbines that power entire cities, electrical generators so large it takes special trains to transport them, motors for every industrial application imaginable, from tiny fractional horsepower motors for household appliances to massive motors that drive factory production lines. They're producing most of America's electrical infrastructure. Every major city that gets electricity probably has GE equipment from Schenectady somewhere in its power grid. But Steinmetz isn't done innovating. He becomes obsessed with lightning. He believes that if you can truly understand lightning, you can protect electrical systems from it.
And as the electrical grid expands across America, lightning strikes become a massive problem. One good lightning storm can destroy transformers, knock out power to entire regions, cause millions of dollars in damage. Steinmetz decides he's going to solve this problem, and his solution is characteristically insane. He decides to create artificial lightning.
In 1920, he starts building a massive apparatus in Building 28 at the GE plant. For months, there are mysterious explosions at odd hours. Thunder crashes echo through the factory at midnight, at 3 a.m., terrifying the neighbors. The entire city of Schenectady whispers about what's happening in that building. Is Steinmetz going mad? Is he building a weapon? Nobody knows. In March 1922, Steinmetz invites reporters and Thomas Edison himself, his old colleague who hasn't been to Schenectady in years, to witness something unprecedented. He's built a detailed miniature village, white chapel with a steeple, houses, trees, all perfectly crafted. And he's built a lightning generator that can produce 120,000 volts of artificial lightning on command. The demonstration begins. Steinmetz, this tiny, hunchbacked man, stands at his control panel. Edison watches, fascinated. Steinmetz flips a switch, and lightning explodes from the machine. Massive bolts of electrical energy that split the wooden miniatures, destroy the chapel steeple, obliterate the trees, leave scorch marks on everything. The crack of thunder is deafening. The smell of ozone fills the room. Edison is amazed. The reporters are stunned. The next day, the New York Times runs a headline that captures the moment perfectly. Modern Jove hurls lightning at will. The article describes Steinmetz as a modern Zeus, controlling the most powerful force in nature. But this isn't just showmanship. This isn't just Steinmetz being dramatic. His work on artificial lightning leads directly to the lightning protection systems we still use today on power grids. Every time a power line survives a lightning storm, that's Steinmetz's work protecting it, almost a century later.
But Steinmetz's greatest contribution might not be his inventions, it might be his humanity. Because while he's revolutionizing electrical engineering, he's also revolutionizing Schenectady itself. When a socialist mayor is elected in Schenectady in 1911, Frank Smith, Steinmetz volunteers to help the new administration. He becomes president of the Board of Education, and he transforms the school system. He institutes longer school hours so working parents have better childcare. He creates free school meals, providing breakfast and lunch to every student, 80 years before it becomes standard in America. He brings in school nurses to provide health care, creates special classes for immigrant children who don't speak English, distributes free textbooks to every student instead of making poor families buy them. He serves on the city council, helps develop Schenectady's park system, pushes for better public services. This 4-foot-tall, hunchbacked German immigrant socialist becomes one of the most beloved figures in the city. When he dies in 1923, thousands of people line the streets for his funeral. The entire city mourns. Because Steinmetz proved something crucial, that caring about people and pushing for innovation aren't contradictory, that the best work comes from places where workers are valued, educated, healthy, that corporate success and community well-being can go hand in hand. But beneath all this success, beneath the innovations and the growth, there's a darker reality building. Because while GE is inventing the future, while they're making Schenectady into an industrial powerhouse, they're also becoming something else, a giant, a monopoly.
A company so large and so powerful that it operates by different rules than everyone else. By 1917, 20,000 people work at GE Schenectady. The city's population is 80,000. 1 in 4 people in Schenectady works for GE. The factory isn't just an employer, it's its own city within the city. It has its own police department, its own fire department, its own hospital, its own cafeterias and stores. Workers spend their entire lives inside the GE ecosystem. Born in Schenectady, educated in schools that Steinmetz improved, hired by GE, married, raised families in company housing, shopped at company stores, retired with a GE pension. Their entire existence revolves around the factory. And for decades, this system works beautifully because GE keeps growing. The 1920s are boom times for American manufacturing. But then comes the Depression in the 1930s. The economy collapses, orders dry up. Companies across America are going bankrupt, laying off workers, shuttering factories. But GE survives. They weather the storm, keep most of their workforce employed. Why? Because they're so diversified, because they have so many product lines,
Because they have a research lab that keeps developing new technologies, even during the worst economic crisis in American history. And then comes World War II, and World War II changes absolutely everything. When America enters the war in December 1941, the government needs electrical equipment for the military on a scale never before seen in human history. Ships, submarines, aircraft, radar systems, radio equipment, all of it needs electrical components. And there's only one factory in America capable of producing them in the quantities needed, fast enough to make a difference.
Schenectady. The GE workforce explodes like a bomb going off, from 20-something thousand to 30,000 to 35,000. By 1944, at the peak of war production, 45,000 people work at Schenectady Works. 45,000. The factory runs 24 hours a day, 3 shifts, 7 days a week, no holidays, no breaks, maximum production all the time. They're building propulsion turbines for battleships, all of them. Every single American battleship in World War II is powered by turbines built in Schenectady. The USS Missouri, where the Japanese will surrender, ending the war, GE turbines. Aircraft carriers, too, the massive ships that project American power across the Pacific, GE turbines. Cruisers, destroyers, submarines, landing craft. 75% of the Navy's propulsion power comes from GE, and most of it from Schenectady specifically. The numbers are almost impossible to believe. In the 4 years from 1941 to 1945, GE Schenectady produces more turbines than they did in the previous 40 years combined. 27 million horsepower of naval propulsion, turbines for 1,700 ships. The factory becomes the most critical industrial site in America. They're not just supporting the war effort, they're manufacturing victory itself. But it's not just turbines. GE Schenectady is building radar systems, the early warning technology that helps Britain survive the German bombing campaign. Radio communication equipment for bombers and fighters, letting pilots coordinate attacks and call for support. Autopilot systems that let pilots fly longer missions without fatigue. Remote turret controls for defensive guns.
They're even building components for the Manhattan Project, the top-secret program to build the atomic bomb. Mass spectrometers that help separate uranium isotopes. Schenectady is building the weapons that end the war. And the workers know exactly what's at stake. There's a sense of purpose in the factory during these years that transcends normal labor relations. They're not just building products for profit, they're saving civilization. Democracy itself hangs in the balance. Fathers, sons, and grandfathers all work side by side. Women join the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking jobs that were exclusively male before the war. Everyone is united in a single mission: victory over fascism. The factory floor during wartime is indescribable unless you were there. The noise is overwhelming, a constant roar of machinery that makes conversation impossible without shouting. The heat from the furnaces and the welding makes it feel like working inside an oven. The smell of hot metal and cutting oil fills your lungs. 3 shifts means the factory never stops, never quiets, never rests. When one shift leaves, another is already walking in the gates. The parking lots are always full. The cafeterias are always packed. Downtown Schenectady is thriving because 45,000 workers all have paychecks and all need places to spend them. Then the war ends, August 1945. Victory. And for a brief, glorious moment, it seems like nothing will ever stop GE Schenectady. The workforce stays high through the late 1940s, 32,000 in 1950. The factory is modernized with the latest equipment. In 1947, they start building a new turbine plant that will be the largest in the world, 20 acres under one roof.
When it opens in 1950, Building 273, it's the largest turbine manufacturing facility on planet Earth. They're building generators that can power entire cities, turbines that range from 20,000 kilowatts to 200,000 kilowatts. These are the machines that will electrify America's post-war boom. Every suburb that springs up needs electricity. Every new shopping mall, every new factory, every new school needs power. And GE Schenectady is building the infrastructure that makes it all possible. The 1950s and 60s are remembered as the golden age. GE Schenectady is the crown jewel of American manufacturing. The massive GE logo on top of Building 37 lights up the night sky, visible for miles in every direction, a glowing symbol of American industrial might. They call Schenectady the Electric City, and it's not marketing hype, it's literal truth. This city makes electricity possible for the entire nation. Workers have good jobs, union jobs with real power. The United Electrical Workers Union negotiates strong contracts with real benefits, pensions that actually work, healthcare, job security. If you have a job at GE in 1960, you expect to retire from GE 30 years later. That's just how it works. Your father worked there, you work there, your son will work there. 3 generations, 4 generations. This is what American manufacturing means in the post-war era. Stability, community, a guaranteed future. But in the 1970s, something starts to change. Employment starts dropping, not dramatically at first, just slowly, steadily. From the mid-20,000s down to 24,000 by 1980. People notice, but they're not panicking. Industries evolve, companies adjust.
Some jobs are automated. That's normal progress. Everything will be fine. GE is eternal. GE is Schenectady. Nothing can change that fundamental reality. And then, Jack Welch happens, and Jack Welch destroys everything. 1981. John Francis Welch Jr. becomes CEO of General Electric. He's 45 years old, youngest CEO in GE history, a chemical engineer who worked his way up through the plastics division. And he has a vision for the company that will transform not just GE, not just Schenectady, but the entire philosophy of American capitalism, and it's going to destroy everything the workers have built over a century. Welch's philosophy is brutally simple. Shareholder value above all else. Every single quarter, the stock price must go up. Earnings must increase. If a division isn't number 1 or number 2 in its market, you fix it immediately, close it, or sell it. There's no room for sentiment, no room for history, no room for loyalty to workers or communities. Only profit, only growth, only stock price. And he introduces something that will become infamous across American business. He calls it the vitality curve. Others call it rank and yank. Here's how it works, and pay attention because this is the system that will destroy tens of thousands of lives. Every manager rates their employees from best to worst. The top 20% get bonuses and rewards. The middle 70% are acceptable, they keep their jobs. The bottom 10% get fired every single year, without exception. Now, you might think, okay, that makes sense, fire the worst performers. But here's the evil genius of the system. It doesn't matter if your division is profitable. It doesn't matter if everyone is performing well.
It doesn't matter if your team just had the best year in company history. 10% must be cut. Always, forever. It's a forced curve, which means you're not competing against an objective standard. You're competing against your coworkers. Every year, someone you work with will lose their job, and next year, it might be you. This creates a culture of fear unlike anything American manufacturing has ever seen. People stop collaborating because helping a coworker might put you in the bottom 10% instead of them. People hoard information, sabotage each other. The camaraderie that made GE great, the teamwork that won World War II, it all disappears, replaced by cutthroat competition where your coworkers are your enemies. In his first 2 years as CEO, Welch fires 72,000 people across all of GE. 72,000 families destroyed. 72,000 careers ended. 72,000 people who thought they had secure futures suddenly jobless. And Schenectady gets hit harder than almost anywhere else because Schenectady is old GE, legacy GE, the place where all this started, and Welch hates that. The carnage begins immediately. 1980, there are 24,000 workers in Schenectady. 1985, 18,000. 6,000 jobs gone in 5 years. 1990, 12,500. Another 5,500 jobs gone. 1995, 6,700. Half the workforce eliminated. And it doesn't stop there. Every Friday afternoon, the same nightmare repeats. Karen Johnson, who serves as mayor of Schenectady from 1984 to 1992, sits in her office. And every Friday, like clockwork, a GE representative walks through her door with the latest bad news. Another 1,000 jobs cut. Another plant closing. Another wave of layoffs. For 8 years, she endures this Friday afternoon ritual. 8 years of watching her city die one layoff at a time. The workers have a name for Welch. They call him Neutron Jack, like the neutron bomb that was developed during the Cold War, a weapon designed to kill all the people but leave the buildings standing. And that's exactly what's happening in Schenectady. The massive factory complex is still there. Building 37 still has the GE logo glowing at night. Building 273, that enormous turbine plant, still stands, but the people are vanishing. Let me tell you what this actually looks like on the ground, what it means when I say the workforce was cut in half, then cut in half again. These aren't just numbers. These are people, families, lives. Tom works on the turbine assembly line. His father worked there. His grandfather worked there. 3 generations of turbine builders. Tom started at GE right out of high school in 1968, worked his way up, became a master craftsman who can assemble a turbine rotor to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. He's good at his job, really good, one of the best. But in 1989, at age 39, he's told his position is being eliminated. Not because he's bad at his job, not because the company is losing money, not because there's no work, because the work is being sent to Greenville, South Carolina, where labor is cheaper and unions are weaker. Tom's entire career, everything he learned, the pride he took in his craftsmanship, gone. He'll spend the next 20 years working retail jobs that pay half what GE paid. He'll never retire. Can't afford to.
Maria works in the lamp factory, one of the few remaining lamp production facilities in Schenectady. She's been there since 1975, 14 years by 1989. She has 2 kids, both in high school. Her husband was laid off from his job at a local manufacturing company 2 years ago. GE is their lifeline, their health insurance, their hope. And then one Friday, Maria and 300 other lamp workers are called into a meeting. The lamp factory is closing. All production is moving to Mexico. They have 60 days. Maria watches her coworkers, some who've worked there for 30 years, break down crying. What are they supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? Schenectady is dying. There are no other good jobs. Jimmy is an engineer in the research lab, MIT graduate, brilliant mind. He came to GE in 1976 because it was the premier place for an electrical engineer to work. He's developed patents that made GE millions. His work on improving turbine efficiency has saved customers money and increased sales. In 1993, he's in the middle of a major project when his manager calls him in. Budget cuts. The project is canceled. His position is eliminated. He's 43 years old. GE offers him a severance package if he signs a non-compete agreement. He signs because he has no choice. For the next 2 years, he can't work for any GE competitor, which is basically everyone in his field. He ends up teaching high school physics because it's the only job he can find that doesn't violate his non-compete. His salary drops by 60%.
Kids who can't go to college because dad lost his job. Retirements delayed indefinitely. Divorces because the financial stress is too much. Depression, alcoholism, suicide. These are the real costs of Jack Welch's shareholder value revolution. These are the lives destroyed so stock prices could go up. Where are the jobs going? Some are being automated, replaced by robots and computer-controlled machinery, but most are going overseas, to Greenville, South Carolina, a right-to-work state where unions are weak and wages are lower. GE actively breaks unions in Greenville, using tactics that would be illegal in New York. They fire union organizers, they intimidate workers, they create a climate of fear. And it works. Greenville workers make less, have fewer benefits, accept worse conditions. The same turbine that took Tom in Schenectady 8 hours to assemble, in Greenville it takes 12 hours with less experienced workers. But the labor costs less, so GE considers it a win. To Mexico, where environmental regulations don't exist and labor is dirt cheap. To China, where workers will do the same job for 1/10 of the pay. Anywhere labor is cheaper, that's where the jobs go. Welch is proud of this. He tells investors he wishes he could put GE factories on barges and float them to wherever costs are lowest at any given moment. He's not embarrassed, he's not apologetic. This is good business. This is what shareholders demand. If you don't like it, you don't understand capitalism. And Welch isn't just cutting factory workers, he's gutting research and development, engineering. Everything that made GE innovative is being slashed. Why? Because research doesn't produce immediate profits, because engineers cost money, because Welch has a different vision for how GE will grow.
And it has nothing to do with manufacturing. Welch's secret weapon is GE Capital, the financial services division. He grows it into a massive shadow bank.
They buy insurance companies, issue credit cards, make equipment leases, get into commercial real estate loans, subprime mortgages, all the financial games that banks play. And by the time Welch retires in 2001, GE Capital accounts for 40% of GE's profits. General Electric has transformed from a manufacturing company into a bank that happens to make things, and Wall Street absolutely loves it. GE's stock price goes absolutely vertical, from $14 billion in market cap when Welch takes over to $410 billion when he leaves. He's hailed as the manager of the century by Fortune magazine. Business schools teach case studies about his methods. Other CEOs frantically copy his style. Downsize, offshore, financialize, maximize quarterly earnings at any cost. It becomes the gospel of American business throughout the 1980s and 90s. But in Schenectady, it's hell on earth. Families that have worked at GE for 3 generations watch their lives collapse in real time. Workers with 20, 30 years of experience are fired and replaced with nobody, just eliminated. The factory that employed 45,000 people during World War II now employs fewer than 7,000. And those 7,000 live in constant terror. Because if you're not in the top 20%, if you're just average, solid, dependable, you might end up in that bottom 10% next year, and then you're gone. Your career is over, your pension might be in jeopardy, your health care disappears, everything you worked for, gone. The city itself starts dying.
Downtown Schenectady becomes a ghost town. Stores close because there are no customers. Restaurants shut down. Property values collapse because nobody wants to buy a house in a dying city. The population drops from 88,000 in 1950 to 60,000 in 2000. People are fleeing. And GE isn't just cutting workers. They're fighting the city on property taxes, demanding tax breaks, taking everything and giving back nothing. Mary D'Alessandro works at GE for over 30 years in marketing and communications. She watches the transformation firsthand. Later, she'll document it publicly, describing how the atmosphere changes completely under Welch. Before Welch, there's loyalty, collaboration, a sense that you're all building something together, that your success and the company's success are linked. After Welch, it's pure fear, competition between workers, dog eat dog, every person for themselves. Trust disappears, teamwork disappears. The culture that made GE great is systematically destroyed. But here's what makes it all even worse, even more infuriating. The innovations keep coming from Schenectady. Even as Welch is gutting the workforce, the engineers who remain are still creating breakthroughs. Better turbines, more efficient generators, advanced materials, new manufacturing techniques. But now, those innovations are being sent overseas to be manufactured. The research happens in America, the patents are American. The profits flow to American executives. But the jobs, those go to China, to Mexico, to anywhere but Schenectady. And the workers understand exactly what's happening. They're not stupid. They read the newspapers. They see Welch's salary, millions per year. They see his bonuses, his stock options that make him fabulously wealthy.
They see GE executives getting richer than kings while they're getting layoff notices. They see the company posting record profits while they're being told there's no money for raises. This isn't about survival. This isn't about keeping the company afloat. This is about greed, pure, uncomplicated greed. The union fights back as hard as they can. Strikes, negotiations, legal battles, public protests. But they're losing because the law has changed. Starting in the 1980s under Reagan, the government stops enforcing antitrust regulations. Corporate lobbying groups, including the Business Roundtable that Welch helps lead, successfully weaken labor laws. Unions lose power, workers lose protection, and guys like Welch win everything. By 2001, when Welch retires after 20 years of destruction, he's personally worth $720 million. His severance package, his golden parachute for leaving, is $417 million. Read that number again, $417 million, for running a company into the ground and destroying tens of thousands of lives. And everyone celebrates him. CNBC throws him parties, Harvard Business School studies his methods, business books treat him like a hero. He's a legend. But the cracks are already showing in the system he built, because everything Welch did was short-term thinking. He cut research and development, strangling future innovation. He sold off profitable divisions just because they weren't growing fast enough. He loaded up GE Capital with increasingly risky financial products to keep quarterly earnings growing. He focused obsessively on meeting earnings targets, even if it meant accounting tricks and financial manipulation. The whole thing is a house of cards. And in 2008, that house collapses completely. The financial crisis hits, the subprime mortgage market implodes, and GE Capital, which Welch built into a massive behemoth, nearly destroys the entire company. GE stock price, which peaked at over $60 per share, crashes to $6. All those workers who invested their retirement savings in GE stock, trusting the company, wiped out. All those retirees counting on GE pensions that were supposedly safe, suddenly uncertain if they'll actually get paid. Jeff Immelt takes over as CEO after Welch, and he spends his entire 16-year tenure trying to fix the damage. He can't. The problems are too deep. The culture is too broken. GE keeps shrinking, keeps bleeding. By 2018, the Schenectady workforce is down to 4,000 people. The union that once represented tens of thousands now has 800 members, and only 600 of those actually work in Schenectady. The industrial giant that powered America through World War II, that electrified the nation, that invented the future, that employed an entire city for over a century, has been reduced to a shadow. And in November 2021, GE announces the final chapter. They're breaking up entirely. The company will split into 3 separate businesses: GE Aerospace for aircraft engines, GE Healthcare for medical equipment, GE Vernova for power generation. The General Electric Company, founded by Thomas Edison in 1892, will cease to exist as a unified entity. But here's what's remarkable about Schenectady. The city refuses to die completely. Because while GE was collapsing, something else was happening.
The city was learning to survive without its corporate overlords. They brought in a casino on the old Alco Locomotive Works site, revitalized downtown with new restaurants and shops, attracted new businesses in technology and healthcare, built new residential projects. The city that was once 100% dependent on GE learned, painfully, slowly, to diversify. And incredibly, GE Schenectady itself is showing signs of life again. Building 273, that enormous turbine plant built in the 1940s, is still operating, still building massive steam turbines for power plants around the world. In 2024, GE Vernova announces a $90 million investment in the Schenectady plant. They're hiring 100 new workers, adding wind turbine manufacturing to the site. It's not 45,000 jobs, it's not even 4,000, but it's something. It's hope. The research lab in nearby Niskayuna, which started in Steinmetz's carriage house in 1900, is still operating, still innovating. When GE split into 3 companies, the research lab split with it, 3 separate advanced research centers. The legacy of innovation continues, even if the glory days are gone forever. But let's be absolutely clear about what happened here. This isn't a happy story with a happy ending. Tens of thousands of people lost their jobs, families were destroyed, life savings evaporated, a community was devastated, all so that executives could boost stock prices and collect massive bonuses. The promise of American manufacturing, that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you'd have security and dignity, was deliberately broken by people like Jack Welch, who put quarterly earnings above human lives.
The story of GE Schenectady is the story of American industry in miniature, the rise from nothing, the golden age of innovation and prosperity, the betrayal by executives who cared only about themselves, the collapse, and maybe, just maybe, a small rebirth. But that rebirth comes at an enormous cost. The new jobs don't pay like the old jobs. The workforce is a fraction of what it was. The security is gone forever. The factory that once employed 45,000 now employs 1/10 of that number. So what's the lesson? Because there has to be a lesson, right? Innovation alone isn't enough. You can have the greatest scientists in the world, like Steinmetz and Langmuir. You can invent technologies that change civilization. You can build products that power nations. But if the people making decisions only care about short-term profit, if they see workers as costs to be cut instead of assets to be valued, then everything collapses eventually. Always. Steinmetz understood this in his bones. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a socialist who believed in taking care of people. He fought for school lunches and better parks and education for immigrants because he knew that healthy communities produce better work. The workers in World War II understood this. They weren't just building turbines. They were defending democracy. There was purpose beyond profit. Jack Welch didn't understand this. Or maybe he understood perfectly and simply didn't care. He believed in one thing only: shareholder value. And he preached that gospel so effectively that an entire generation of CEOs followed his example. Downsize, offshore, financialize. The result? America's manufacturing base gutted, communities destroyed, inequality exploding to levels not seen since the Gilded Age.
And companies that, despite record profits, are shadows of what they used to be. But it didn't have to be this way. Germany kept its manufacturing base. Japan kept its manufacturing base. They have strong unions, worker protections, long-term thinking, and their economies are doing fine, better than fine in many ways. The choice to gut American manufacturing wasn't inevitable. It was a choice made by people like Welch, enabled by politicians who deregulated everything, celebrated by a business press that worshipped at the altar of rising stock prices. The factory is still there in Schenectady. Building 273 still stands. The GE logo still lights up the night sky on Building 37. But if you walk through those buildings now, try to imagine what it was like when 45,000 people worked there, when 3 shifts ran 24 hours a day building weapons to win a world war, when the factory floor was so loud you couldn't hear yourself think, when the parking lots stretched for acres, when downtown Schenectady thrived because everyone had paychecks and futures. That world is gone, completely gone, and it's never coming back, not the way it was. Maybe that's inevitable. Maybe the future is different. Smaller workforces, more automation, different kinds of jobs. But if we're going to build that future, we need to learn from the past. We need to remember that the golden age of American manufacturing wasn't just about innovation. It was about shared prosperity. Workers had power. Unions had strength. Companies reinvested in communities instead of shipping jobs overseas to boost quarterly earnings. This is the story of General Electric's Schenectady Works.
From 2 empty buildings and a desperate inventor to the largest electrical manufacturing facility on Earth. From 45,000 workers building victory in World War II to 800 union members wondering if they'll have jobs next year. From innovation that changed the world to a company so broken it had to split into 3 pieces just to survive. From the American dream to the American nightmare. The buildings remain, the lights still glow, but everything else has changed. And if we don't learn from what happened here, we'll keep losing factories and jobs and communities until there's nothing left but empty buildings and fading memories of what we once were capable of building together. Don't forget Schenectady. Don't forget what happened there. Don't forget the price of putting profit over people, because that price is still being paid every day in every factory town across America watching jobs disappear, in every worker facing a layoff despite years of loyal service, in every community watching its tax base evaporate while CEOs get richer, in every family watching their children leave because there's no future here anymore. The story of GE Schenectady Works is American history. It's our history. And history forgotten is history repeated. So remember it all. Remember that innovation without humanity is worthless. Remember that companies are made of people, not just stock prices. Remember that the greatest achievements in American industrial history came from places where workers were valued, where communities mattered, where there was purpose beyond quarterly earnings. Remember that Steinmetz did his best work while also fighting for school lunches and better education.
Remember that the workers who built the turbines that won World War II weren't just following orders for a paycheck. They believed they were building something that mattered. Remember that it took 100 years to build GE Schenectady into the crown jewel of American manufacturing, and it took Jack Welch 20 years to destroy it. Remember that destruction is always easier than creation. Remember that the executives who gutted American manufacturing became fabulously wealthy, while the workers who actually built things lost everything. Remember that the buildings still stand, that Building 273 still makes turbines, that the GE logo still lights up the Schenectady night. But also remember what's missing: the 45,000 workers who once filled those buildings, the community that thrived around them, the promise that if you worked hard,
you'd have security and dignity. That promise is broken, and it was broken deliberately. Remember that this didn't just happen in Schenectady. It happened in Detroit with the auto industry, in Pittsburgh with steel, in countless factory towns across America. The same pattern, the same excuse, the same result. Workers sacrificed for stock prices, communities destroyed for quarterly earnings, the American dream sold overseas for cheaper labor. But also remember that it doesn't have to keep happening, that we can make different choices, that we can build companies that value workers alongside shareholders, that we can have unions with real power, that we can require companies to invest in communities, not just extract from them, that we can prioritize long-term prosperity over short-term profit. Other countries do it. We can too. The story of GE Schenectady Works is a warning.
But warnings only matter if we listen to them, if we learn from them, if we refuse to let them repeat. So the next time you hear about a factory closing, about jobs moving overseas, about a CEO making hundreds of millions while workers get laid off, remember Schenectady. Remember what was lost. Remember what was destroyed. And demand better. Because somewhere in America right now, there's a factory where workers are building something that matters, something that could power the future the way Schenectady powered the past. And we get to choose. Do we value those workers? Do we protect those communities? Do we build a system where prosperity is shared? Or do we let another Schenectady happen? Another generation of workers betrayed? Another city hollowed out? The buildings are still there. The lights are still on. The story isn't over. It's just waiting for us to write a different ending. One where we learned the lesson. One where we chose differently. One where innovation and humanity go hand in hand, the way Steinmetz always believed they should. Don't forget Schenectady. Don't forget what happened there. Don't forget that $7,500 almost prevented it all from starting. And don't forget that greed destroyed it all in the end. Remember, learn, choose better, because the future is watching, and history is waiting to see if we're smart enough to change.